This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
Team USA's hopes of winning yet another World Cup this year have gone up in flames as they did fall to Sweden earlier on this week, but that does open up a lot of ambiguity at the top end of the pool for this year's Women's World Cup as we try to decide who will hoist that trophy for this year. We're going to talk to Dr. Ed Feng, get his read on the remaining contenders, and talk some matches coming up here in the round of 16 and the round of 8. This is Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a digital media managing editor for FanDuel Research, joined here as mentioned by Dr. Ed Feng. You can find his work over at thepowerrank.com. You can check him out on Twitter or X, whatever it's called, at the Power Rank. And Ed, tough loss for the U.S. team. Were you up at 4 or 5 a.m. Eastern to watch the loss of Sweden this week?
No, I was not up. My son wanted to get up, and at the last minute, I was like, "No, let's just sleep in. We'll turn it on first thing when we get up. We'll watch it." So yeah, it was a nice family morning. All of us got together, watched it. Obviously disappointing for the U.S. women's national team. Not as disappointing for my Sweden futures.
True.
Which I actually, I mean, I didn't have any kind of hedge on it. Not that you really should hedge when you're in the round of 16, but so Sweden futures. And I think if you follow this tournament, if you follow the U.S. team, it was pretty clear that this could have happened, right? I thought they played better than Sweden. I thought they were the better team out there, as they probably should be, because I think they are a slightly better team. They played that way. But it's certainly not out of the question that you get, you go 0-0 into extra time, still 0-0, and then you lose in a shootout. That was very tight. So in my newsletter, I did have my favorite bet, Jim, even total goals. So I did have that on the match, and I was actually like, I think we had talked about it like a couple weeks ago. Yeah. There was a match we were looking at, and I was like, it didn't look like there was any more value over at DK on that bet, but there was on this one, and it was awesome.
Technically, Ed, 0 is not a number. So it's not an even number.
Absolutely even. Absolutely freaking even, dude.
Should I trust the math PhD on this? Should I defer to you when it comes to this kind of stuff?
You can defer to. I can show you my FanDuel account. My UK account that has a winning bet on the even total goals.
If it's graded as a win, it is a win. It's an even number. Absolutely. The futures you were talking about with Sweden, we talked about them before the tournament. They were 18-1 to win it all. We talked about them the week after too, and they were 25-1 later on. And they shortened a lot, obviously. They are now into the round of 8. We'll talk about the futures market. We'll talk about Sweden, and we'll do a post-mortem on Team USA here in just a second as well. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. We are back here every weekday from now until the end of NFL season. I'll be here every day talking some bets with you. Also up over on the FanDuel YouTube page and FanDuel TV Plus. Big thank you to Tom Vecchio for filling in for me while I was gone this past week. Tom has always doing a great job, both here on Covering the Spread and over on the Solo Shop. But we are back and ready to rumble till the end of NFL season, with 5 shows per week here on Covering the Spread. Make sure you're subscribed on the podcast feed or FanDuel's YouTube page or over on FanDuel TV Plus. Have you ever started a player in your fantasy lineup who scores 3 points while someone on your bench puts up 20? Well, with FanDuel's NFL Best Ball drafts, you don't have to worry about that. Draft your team, and each week, the highest scoring lineup from your roster will be used as you battle for first place all season long. Leagues can be free to play or for money and range from 3 to 12 players. The NFL season will be here before you know it, so head over to FanDuel today and get in on the action. Eligibility restrictions apply. Now let's start things off here, Ed, by talking about that Team USA defeat in Sweden, or to Sweden, I should say. I think that we want to look at this from like an analytical perspective, because obviously there's disappointment knowing that they weren't able to get past Sweden, who was a very good team. They had, I would say, kind of a shaky group stage, but when we talked in the group stage, you were talking about how their expected goals numbers were still pretty good. It just didn't translate into actual results. So when you look at this team on the whole, taking all 4 matches together, what did the underlying numbers say about what Team USA did in this year's World Cup?
I think the U.S. women were fine. I think they played a lot better than obviously the results showed. As you mentioned, they did not finish well. and there are obvious consequences when you don't finish well. You tend to not win. We're going to talk about a team a little bit later that has the exact opposite situation going on. But, I think the narrative heading into this World Cup was that, is the rest of the world catching up? And I think before the start of the World Cup, I knew that was a true thing. And we're going to talk a little bit later about Spain. And I think a lot of these European nations are catching up. I still think the U.S. is ahead of almost all of those nations. But as my numbers suggested before the start of the tournament, like the margin isn't big. The rest of the world is getting better. Overall, honestly, I don't think U.S. soccer has the best development strategy. I'm starting to see this actually like firsthand in terms of youth soccer. Tend to favor size and athleticism more so than we should in soccer. I think that filters up to the national teams. I think that is changing. I think we are doing better than we were 2 decades ago. And I still think the U.S. women are either at the top of the world or close to the top of the world. So I certainly expect for them to contend in future World Cups. But, it's not a shock that they couldn't get past Sweden. It's it could have gone either way. And really, even as we headed into that shootout, and if you didn't see it, like Sweden needed to convert one to go through. It was like the 7th shot of that they had taken, and the ball, the keeper makes a save, and the ball pops up, and it looks like it didn't go in from the television, and then you see the ref saying that it did go in. And unfortunately, at that point, like there's almost no chance that the ref got it wrong because their 2 lineswomen were like right there on the line. They had a clear view of it. And like the broadcast makes us wait like 20 minutes to see the replay, right? Like watching Sweden celebrate. So that was rough. That's obviously like a rough way to lose. It did go over the line. So yeah, overall, I'm very optimistic for where the U.S. women are. If you think about it, like a round of 16 exit is like utter failure for the women, and nice job, men. So same exact result, very different reaction.
Yeah, I think that if you take together their performance in the World Cup, you look at the underlying numbers, and then you pair that with what your number said going in, it kind of feels like once you account for the variants that are involved, especially when it's low scoring matches, it seems like the US's performance was closer to expectation than what perception is right now. Because perception right now seems like you said, utter failure because based on the results, but it seems like based on the way they played and based on what your number said going in, it kind of just seems like this was within the range of outcomes and always a possibility because of the tightening that you mentioned heading in.
Yeah, for sure. This is definitely within the range of outcomes. And yeah, I would completely agree with that. And hopefully we'll get better results in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll see how that goes. They got 4 more years to regroup before the next World Cup, and we'll see what transpires there. A lot of important matches until that time as well. And a lot of changeover too with this team, but some youth there for sure as well. And we'll talk Team USA once they are back on the map. But a lot of teams still in action, Ed. And let's talk about a couple more round of 16 matches coming up later on this week. We have got Colombia taking on Jamaica. Colombia's money line to advance -205. We got Jamaica plus 165. France taking on Morocco. France's money line is -3,500. So we talked before about how you're probably not going to be betting a lot of matches with money lines that slanted. Any thoughts for you on Colombia, Jamaica, or is that one in your eyes probably pretty fairly priced?
It looks pretty fairly priced. These are 2 teams that were not expected to make it this far. Colombia actually looked pretty good. The numbers don't really like either of these teams. And personally, I haven't seen either of them play, so I don't really have an opinion outside of what the numbers say. Probably neither team's not going to make it too much further. They're both near the bottom of the odds to win it all.
We do have some pretty fun round of 8 matchups already set. The first 2 are Spain against Netherlands and Japan taking on Sweden. Obviously, we talked about Sweden. We talked about Spain a lot before too, and we saw the Netherlands taking on the U.S. So, look at these 2 round of 8 games. Any value you're seeing across those 2 numbers based on those 2 games based on your numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. I will give you, let's break down both games. So in terms of Spain versus the Netherlands, I think Spain's the best team in this tournament. I don't think it's really even close. The only thing that has kind of gone against that is a 4-0 drubbing against Japan. Obviously, that was a bet that I talked about on the show that did not work out. My apologies. But the XG in that game was actually pretty close. And I think from what I have seen of Spain, and it's a little bit of a bias sample because I didn't watch much of that Japan game, but I did watch them completely dismantle Norway, I think it was, whoever they had in the last round. And I'd seen them a little bit earlier in the group stage. I definitively think they are the best team in this tournament. They're facing the Netherlands team that is not as highly regarded. They're missing one of their superstars. Also, Danielle van de Donk is out for this match because of card accumulation, and she is one of their better players. Definitely a solid European side, but you can coming into this tournament, you could kind of tell that the markets were not very high on the Netherlands. I like Spain to go through here. I actually bet them to advance. I think at this price, I think I got it this morning. I do like them to advance. I do think they're the best team in this tournament, and I expect them to go on. And it's one of these things where it's certainly not a numbers thing. When I look at just goals in big matches since the last World Cup, adjust for strength of schedule, it actually has Spain at about a 35% chance to advance. When you look at XG over the last World Cup and Euro, Spain has a 68% chance to advance here. So the numbers are kind of all over the place. I think at this point in the tournament, especially with like injuries, especially even before the start of the tournament, not having Van de Donk, I tend to not lean on those numbers quite as much. Tend to lean on what I've seen, what the markets are saying, and a little bit to that extent. But I think the Spain women are the best team in this tournament, and I like them to advance here at this price.
The money line right now, as you mentioned, for Spain to advance over at FanDuel Sportsbook is -188. The implied odds there are 65%. You mentioned 68% based on the XG. And I think that it's probably encouraging for you when that number, at least, even if both models don't agree, when that number aligns with the eye test, and the eye test tells you that Spain is this dominant team that should be well regarded. They're facing a Netherlands team that is not at 100% right now. It's probably reassuring for you when the eye test that for you watching this team aligns with at least what one of the models is saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Spain, as a nation, the women attacked a lot in that round of 16. And that's something that the men sometimes don't do. They tend to be like, hey, we're Spain and we're just going to possess the ball and we're going to kick it around the midfield without acknowledging the fact that goal differential is what matters in games. The women didn't have that problem. They attacked even when they were up 3-1. So I really do like them here.
Okay, so that is Spain and -188 to advance, taking on the Netherlands. You can get that number over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Other game is Japan taking on Sweden. Japan -172 on the money line to advance. Sweden is +140, and you've got that Sweden future. Japan is a team you were skeptical of before, but now had that impressive game against Spain. Any read for you on this match, Ed, or is it kind of a stay away because Japan has overperformed so much so far?
No, this is actually my biggest take of the entire tournament. There's no way that Japan should be the favorite here. No way. And when I saw this line, even though I have that Sweden future, I definitely like Sweden to advance. I think Sweden's probably the second best team remaining in this tournament. The markets still haven't really given them that credit. Like you can actually get 10-1 right now, I think, for Sweden to win this. I don't think that respects how good this team is. It's a really solid veteran team. And yeah, they got outplayed by the US, but the US is a really good team. I think that, and let's talk about Japan versus the US, right? Like the US has gotten docked for not finishing well, despite having high XG. It's the exact opposite story for Japan. They are finishing extremely well. Their XG's been fine. It was really particularly good against Zambia, but not so much in those other group stage matches against Spain and the other team in their group. The game, the game against in their last round, they very much could have lost that. It ended up being like a 4-1 win for Japan, but there was an own goal in there that Japan scored on to start. There was another bad mistake by the other team. Japan had a really lovely goal as well. So Japan is finishing really well, and it's kind of the opposite of the United States. I went back and looked at some of the work that I did before the tournament. Japan didn't have one of the top 10 odds to win this overall. There were a lot of countries ahead of them. I'm looking at my list right now. For example, like Brazil was 32-1 that was ahead of them. Canada was 34-1, also ahead of Japan pre-flop before this tournament started. The impression has obviously changed. Japan is getting results. The XG kind of doesn't support that. I think Sweden's the second best team in this tournament. I think they're really good, and it hasn't necessarily shown up entirely in terms of the goal column. I don't think Sweden should be an underdog here.
And again, the money line for them is plus 140 over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Ed already has a future on Sweden, but fine adding the plus 140 money line to advance as well. The game you're referencing was Japan against Norway, the round of 16. The final there was Japan 3, Norway 1, despite the own goal there as well. So let's take a look at the futures market and just kind of like take a look at it here, because you were talking about Sweden and how you can get them at 10-1, which you can right now over at FanDuel Sportsbook. England is a favorite at 2-1. Spain is plus 340. Now, you've talked a lot about Spain being the class of this field. It sounds like, I'm just trying to, read based on what you said. It sounds like you may have interest in Spain at plus 340 or Sweden at 10-1. Are those juicy enough, Ed? Well, let's pretend you don't have the Sweden futures already in your pocket. Would those numbers entice you in where they currently sit?
I think so. I think there's value in both of them. I haven't bet the Spain at plus 340. I probably should. I haven't done it yet, but I think that's right. I mean, when you think about England as the favorite, I think that makes sense in terms of they were one of the favorites kind of coming into the tournament. They haven't looked particularly good in terms of XG. Actually had a 0-0 draw with Nigeria, where they had less XG than Nigeria in the round of 16. So I haven't actually seen them play yet, so I don't really have an opinion there. But I have seen Spain play, and they've been really impressive. So yeah, I mean, if you want to dabble with some Spain and some Sweden, I definitely think there's some value there.
Okay, again, Spain is plus 340 to win it all right now. Sweden is 10-1. Ed is also liking the money lines. Spain minus 188 to advance against Netherlands, and Sweden at plus 140 taking on Japan. That's wrap things up for this week here on Covering the Spread, talking about the Women's World Cup. We'll still have more Women's World Cup discussion coming up later on this podcast as well. And then, Ed, College Football Week 0 is just around the corner. But before we get to College Football Week 0, before we get to NFL as well, where we'll have you on twice per week during NFL season, you got Bet Bash coming up. So you're going to be out in Vegas. That sounds like it's a lot of fun. It sounds like you've had a great time in the past, and kind of a nice way to get football season really cranking back up again.
For sure. It's a nice opportunity now that Bet Bash is in August to see everyone right before the start of season, see what's going on with a lot of friends in the industry. So it should be a great event. There's going to be, I think more panels this year and a lot of networking opportunities. So I'm looking forward to heading out to the desert, seeing how hot it is in the middle of the day out in the sun. But yeah, it'll be a lot of fun.
I just spent the past week in the DR in July, July/August, which was quite hot. So I can relate. A lot more humid in the Dominican Republic than it is in Vegas, though. So Ed, have fun, enjoy. People are looking for 5 Nuggets Saturday, looking for your work. Where can they find all that?
Yeah, check it out at thepowerrank.com. Sign up for my free email newsletter. Every week I have 5 Nuggets Saturday. Was lucky enough to have Noah Syndergaard starting a baseball game on this past Saturday, so under 4.5 strikeouts was pretty good for a guy who just isn't quite the same pitcher that he was a couple years ago, seems like. And then really lucky that got a little value on the even total goals for the U.S. as well, U.S. Versus Sweden match. And then also in the newsletter and actually on the podcast too, I'll be having a 10-part preview series for the 2023 football season, both college and NFL. So definitely something. There'll be some bets in there. There'll definitely be some insights. So check that out at thepowerrank.com.
All righty. Make sure you follow Ed on Twitter/X at the Power Rank. I am on Twitter at Jim Sonis as well. You can also follow FanDuel Research at FanDuel Research to find all the new home for all of numberFire's content. Again, make sure you subscribe to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts, and check us out on the FanDuel YouTube page and FanDuel TV Plus. We are back once again tomorrow talking some baseball with a loaded slate for tomorrow. We'll talk to you all then. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.